Those white supremacists are having a field day as a result of Donald Trump being in the White House. He is playing to their concerns. He is pushing their buttons, and they are happy to see the orange one at 1600 Pennsylvania. But there's a new book out that details a former white nationalist who realized that it made no sense whatsoever what he was doing. The book is called Rising Out of Hatred: The Awakening of a Former White Nationalist. It is by Eli Saslow. He's a winner of the Pulitzer Prize, and he details the story of Derek Black, who grew up at the epicenter of white nationalism. Eli, welcome to Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here.
So these stories are always quite interesting because we see these interviews and we see these largely white men, young white men who are angry, who are bitter. They have what I call white fear because they can't handle this changing America. What made this individual so interesting that you wanted to make him the center of this book?
Well, I mean, a big part of it is that Derek Black was not just a single racist. He was the heir apparent to this movement and was disastrous in mainstreaming a lot of these ideas. I mean, Derek, by the time he was 22 years old, had been elected to public office in Florida, had a daily show on the radio spreading this awful ideology, had built a white pride site for kids, spreading these ideas to more than 1 million kids who came to the page, did real and profound damage. His father had been head of the KKK for a decade. His godfather, David Duke, is one of the most notorious racial zealots of our time. And Derek was the person who was supposed to lead this movement before going through a radical transformation. So I think that made his case a little bit different.
And you said something that was interesting there, that he was elected to public office. People keep acting as if these white supremacists are walking around with hoods and burning crosses and they're using broken English. No, it has become far more sophisticated, and many of them are running as Republicans. They're pushing those particular buttons. And when you hear Trump talk about illegal immigration, that's one of their buttons. When you hear them talk about the changing demographics of America, that's another issue that is scaring them to death. And so they have really become mainstream over the past 25 years.
No question. I mean, I think it's comforting for us sometimes to think that these are ideas held just by a small number of fringe extremists. The unfortunate truth is that right now in the United States, a huge number of people have really problematic and racist ideas because these are ideas that are embedded in our country and what America has been. Polls consistently show that about 1/3 of white people in America believe that they experience more discrimination than people of color or Jews. The facts of that are wildly inaccurate. Every possible measure that we have says that's not true. But by playing to that real sense of grievance that exists in part of this country, these ideas have real power. That's the platform that Derek ran on when he was running for office by saying, we need fewer signs in Spanish. We need to build a wall on the border. We need to prioritize European-only immigration. We need to focus on crime in the inner cities. And now we see that those talking points get people elected at much higher levels as well.
And you talk about the transformation of Derek. What started it?
So Derek went to college. I mean, he'd grown up really sort of indoctrinated with a lot of these ideas. Since the time he was a little kid, he'd been a big figure in this movement. The first time that he sort of got out of it after being homeschooled for a lot of years was going to this little college in Florida called New College of Florida. Derek went when he was 22 years old. It was the best school in Florida, the cheapest school. It just seemed to make sense for him. And he went there and he began bumping into people who were often the victims of his prejudices, whose ideas about race were entirely different than his own. And they began to challenge him through first protest by civil resistance, sort of shutting down the campus to make clear that his ideas were not welcome there, through debating him on the facts. And I think it's comforting to know that all of the facts are on the side of the anti-racist. White nationalism is based on false science, false ideas about IQ differentials, criminality, all of it's wrong. And the students began debating Derek based on these ideas and also building relationships with him that did enable him to begin seeing beyond the prejudices to the people and to the humanity. All of those things began wearing away at some of his ideas.
And when you look at what's happening now, we saw what took place in Charlottesville. We see, of course, Bob Woodward's book where Trump said that was the worst speech he gave. The reality is Donald Trump is emboldening these white nationalists. He is pushing the buttons that they have long sought. And the reality is when you see them doing robocalls for Ron DeSantis against Andrew Gillum in Florida, when you see them openly embracing Donald Trump, the Republican Party can say, oh, they disavow that all they want to, but they are saying things that these white nationalists want to hear.
No question. I mean, I don't think the ideas of the white nationalist movement and the ideas of a mainstream political party in this country have ever been so aligned or so close together. And for that reason, I think we've seen a lot of active collaboration, whether that's Donald Trump retweeting white nationalist Twitter accounts and spreading myths about white genocide, or whether it's all these white nationalists like Jared Taylor, David Duke, whoever else, encouraging people who listen to their radio shows to go out and volunteer for these mainstream conservative Republican campaigns, because, as David Duke says, you will meet people who have the same ideas about race as you do. There's a real degree of collaboration right now, and I think white nationalists feel not only emboldened, but more powerful than they have in decades, because their ideas are being carried forth into the public space by some of the primary political actors of our time.
And the thing is not just even this idea of white nationalists. It's individuals who will never call themselves a white nationalist, who will never call themselves a racist, but who hold those beliefs. I've talked to them and they'll say, oh, no, that's not me. But the things that they're saying, the things that they're believing in, they're voting on, and in the case of Derek, the things they're passing on to their children, that's how white supremacy and that's how white nationalism continues to evolve in this American society 399 years after the first 21 Africans arrived in Virginia in 1619.
Yeah, no question. And I think, again, the thing that makes this scary is that it is endemic to the United States. Many of our systems, much of the world that we're living in, the country that we're living in, is still based on white supremacist ideas. That's in the fabric of our founding. And so white nationalists have continued to propagate these myths by going around and spreading their rhetoric to white Americans who don't like to be identified as racist, but who hold a lot of these really problematic beliefs. Derek, when he was a white nationalist, he would always say that the way he recruited people is he would go around and look for people who were saying things like, I'm not racist, but. And as soon as he heard that, he knew that he was talking to somebody who likely agreed with a lot of his platform. I think that's also how we've seen, Donald Trump spread a lot of his ideas by speaking to a very similar audience.
Well, and of course, when you have people like Steve Bannon, who says that Breitbart.com was all about the alt-right, a new name for white supremacists, white nationalists. When you have a Stephen Miller who is sitting in the White House, a major position, setting policy, the reality, and Richard Spencer said when he was at Duke that who was his hero? Stephen Miller. Bottom line is they are still setting policy here in the United States. Final comment, Eli.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think they're still setting policy in the United States. And I think the key is to look closely at these policies and see the roots. I mean, it was David Duke and the Klan who first went to the southern border in the United States, bringing the national media with them in the 1970s and popularizing the idea of building a wall. A lot of these ideas have really dark, racist pasts. And I think if you look past the rhetoric, you'll see a history that's bathed in bloodshed that really needs to be confronted and examined.
The book is called Rising Out of Hatred, The Awakening of a Former White Nationalist by Eli Saslow. Eli, we certainly appreciate you joining us here on Roland Martin Unfiltered.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.